in Texas. And I am so honored to be an Archival Creator Fellow with SAADA. And I've been working on this project for the past year to document the experiences of South Asian Americans who have been impacted by incarceration. So very, very happy to welcome you all today. This past year, I've been working with an incredible community advisory board and members of our community to document these experiences. I've heard so many stories over this past year and just such a strong community. And we're continuing to build it today. We know that even the earliest immigrants to America from South Asia and from the South Asian diaspora experienced incarceration. It's something that's been part of our history for a long time, but also something that can get erased in discussions about incarceration. So this project was an opportunity to really bring to light and to share about how our community has been impacted by incarceration in all sorts of spaces, in juvenile detention, immigration detention, county jails, prisons, and in so many spaces. And my priority during this project has been to ensure that the materials that we're putting together are accessible not only to all of us, but that they're accessible to people who are behind bars, who are currently behind bars, and that those members of our community have access to the stories that we're collecting and that we're sharing. So while my project will ultimately be online for all of us to explore and view and learn from, I'm currently working on creating an archive in an envelope that will be sent to people who are currently incarcerated. And it'll include excerpts from the interviews that we've collected, along with pieces of art. You might have seen when you were registering for this event, the art piece that was up. And so that's one of the pieces that will be sent to people who are currently behind bars, thanks to an incredible Asian American artist who is formerly incarcerated, Nutbo. And we're also going to be including things in that exhibit that we're creating today as a community on this event. And so, for example, the art activity that you are all working on at the beginning of this event that I'll share with you all again, which is the invitation to think about the last time that you saw the moon or the sky, or that you witnessed the moon or the sky, drawing that image of the moon or the sky and writing down how long it's been since you've seen it. And then the invitation to send that in to us at SAADA. That's an activity that we're doing now and that we'll be able to share with our community members that are currently incarcerated. And in fact, that they're working on a similar project as well. In fact, we have one of our panelists today who's currently incarcerated, Tariq, who's on the phone right now and working on participating in this activity alongside us, and many other members of our community who are currently incarcerated who are also sharing about their experiences behind bars and participating in this activity thanks to our amazing partners at the Inside Books Project that have been mailing surveys to people who are inside. So there's so much to say and there's so much to cover in this event, and I want to get right to it. So before I do, I would like to pass it on to Samit, who is the executive director and co-founder of SAADA, to share a little bit about SAADA.
Hey everyone, welcome. It's so good to see all of you here today. My name is Samit. As Savannah mentioned, I'm SAADA's co-founder and executive director. Before I get started, just a couple of logistical details. One, you probably heard the announcement that the event is being recorded, but I'll mention that it's only recording in speaker view, so only those who are speaking are actually going to be in the recording or on camera. However, if you are in a place where you're comfortable turning on your camera, would be really welcome you to do that. Just gives us a sense of being together in a space. And so if you feel comfortable doing that, would be greatly appreciative if you do. Once again, you won't be recorded though, unless you're speaking. If you need live captions, they are enabled. And my colleague Mariam is gonna drop in the chat instructions for how to enable live captions. Just a little bit of background about SAADA. We started SAADA 13 years ago now in 2008, because we recognized that stories from the South Asian American community weren't being preserved and weren't being shared. And fearing that not only important stories from our community were not being heard, but moreover that they're in danger of being erased entirely. The conversation that's going to happen today is exactly the kind of conversation that SAADA was founded to share. Our goal has always been to explore the real diversity of experiences and of voices from our community. But I want to mention that it's only because of the trust from our community that today's conversation is possible. And I want to really express my deep gratitude to Savannah and to all of today's panelists and participants for trusting us with their stories. Today's event is part of SAADA's Archival Creators Fellowship Program. This is a program that's made possible with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And we're just going to be starting our third year of the fellowship very soon. I want to thank our colleagues at Mellon and especially our program officer, Patricia Sway, for their support for this program. I also want to recognize this is the sixth of six events from our fellows this year. I want to recognize and thank my colleague, Mariam Ahmed, who's made so much of our work with the fellowship program possible. It's Mariam's energy and constant deadline reminders really that keep us all going. And I also want to express my deep gratitude to Savannah for the thoughtfulness and care, Savannah, that you've brought to this project. It's been such a pleasure working with you on it. So just once again, thank you all for joining us today. And Savannah, with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sameep. So I'll go ahead and introduce our amazing panelists today. And before I do that, I wanted to share, of course, you're all welcome to stay off video if you want, but you're also totally welcome to turn those videos on so that we can have kind of a sense of community, even though we're all in the digital world right now. So first, I would love to introduce Ra Avis. And Ra, if you want to wave, is an award-winning blogger and an author and an incredible, incredible poet. She identifies as a Chicana Desi and works in the space of incarceration awareness. She's a generational storyteller and is formerly incarcerated herself. And she writes regularly at rarastore.com, and I'm going to put that in the chat in a second. That's a way for you to follow along with her writing. And then next, I would like to introduce Charles Bula Joseph. He is an organizer, a musician, and a spiritual activist. And while he was incarcerated, he organized and performed concerts on the prison yard to boost morale, and was elected by his peers into the Men's Advisory Council that was tasked with maintaining peace in the facility and bringing grievances to the captain and the warden. And he's also doing incredible work here as well. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Tariq MaQbool, who's a member of our community who's currently incarcerated and currently listening in as well. And so his audio clips will be part of this event today. And to introduce him, I'm actually going to introduce Shaheen Pasha, who's a childhood friend of his, and who's also the co-founder and co-executive director of the Prison Journalism Project. So I'll turn it over to you, Shaheen, to introduce Tariq a bit more.
Hi, so actually he's on the phone. So Tariq, if you want to say hello, you can say hello in your own voice and I can introduce who you are.
Hi, everybody. This is Tariq MaQbool from J State Prison. I'm very, very glad that I could make it. And for a few minutes that I have, they allow us. Thank you for SAADA and thank you for BJP and all the friends that are out there who make my voice amplified. So thank you for reading my stuff and supporting people like us who are behind bars. And thank you for this forum.
Okay, and just to tell you, so his Tariq MaQbool is a contributing writer for the Prison Journalism Project. I'm the co-founder and co-executive director of that. And the Prison Journalism Project aims to teach and publish incarcerated writers. And he's about to get off the phone. So Tariq was actually one of the, he was probably the inspiration. He is the inspiration for this. And we are so excited to be able to feature his writing. You can also find his thoughts and writings at captivevoices.com, which is the blog that he maintains with his brother, who is on the call as well. And he's amazing. He's my childhood friend. He's a son. He's a brother, he's a uncle, he's just a really, really great guy. And I think you have 30 seconds remaining. And I think from the perspective of this, seeing him through all those different lenses is really, really important. So I really want to say thank you for giving him the opportunity to not just have his crime be representative, but him as a person be representative. And he writes for the Marshall Project too. So you should read his last piece, which was amazing. And he wrote that in collaboration with the Prison Journalism Project. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad Tariq was able to join us for a little bit. So we're actually going to start out by discussing how people's racial or ethnic classification behind bars has affected their experiences there. And we're actually going to be beginning with Tariq, who's answering the questions, how did your identity as a South Asian American come up in court? And how did the prison system classify you?
So yes, it came up a lot. In jury selection, it came up a lot. When I shave, people can't really tell, I can go from light in the wintertime to a little darker in the summertime. So I can pass for a lot of things, a lot of ethnicities. So in the jury selection, when people would look at me, they're smiling and then my name is, uttered, and then they start talking about my Pakistani heritage. So you literally see people a visual effect on their bodies and their faces, And so it came up a lot, and it made me feel, again, as an alien, as the other. When I first got arrested, I think it was around November, so I guess there wasn't much of a sun out there, so they classified my race as white. That stayed there for almost a decade. Then in the prison later on, it was changed to other, and then very recently, a few years ago, it was changed to unknown. Well, I'm the first idiot who got locked up in my entire family. Mother's side, father's side. It's something that's unique, It's, to me, it's even to them, till this day they can't believe it. So I guess that's it. It's something that's unbelievable. My story of my life everything about it should not tell you that I ended up in here. So I guess, to them it's always going to be an enigma how I ended up in here. It's in our families and in our society, it's a thing of shame, So to me, it's shameful that I brought shame to my family, my father, my mother, my name of my family, and people back home. I come from a very good family, very educated family, very influential family from back home, and even here, they're very respected. So
you have 60 seconds remaining.
It's a sense of shame. I'll call you back.
Thank you to Tariq for sharing that. Ra, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself beyond what I shared in your very quick bio, and also give an example of how the system classified you and how that affected your experience behind bars.
Sure, of course. My name is Ra. My father was born in India. My mother was born in Mexico. I was born in Texas. I see a lot of Texans in the call. Hi, y'all. And I served a year and a half in California State Prison, starting from Orange County. And like most people who get incarcerated, doing the transfer journeys up and down the coast, where I landed at CIW for the final stretch of my journey as a firefighter for the Firehouse program. While I was there, my husband of a decade passed away. And since then, I've done as much incarceration awareness education work as I possibly can do. And mostly I do that through my poetry and writing, since I already have an audience there. It's a little easier to gather people in a room and start randomly talking about prison when they're already willing to be in that room and share space with you. So I've been very lucky to be able to share elements of these things. I think a lot about how so much of what we perceive as shame or misunderstanding within the system really just comes down to like ignorance. We just don't actually know what happens. And this big void that we just kind of walk around in our country is something that I try to like paint into something meaningful, or at least something visible. And when I was incarcerated, like Tariq, I had no experience. I didn't know anyone. I hadn't heard any of these things. And I went from a city jail where I turned myself into county jail, where the first question outside of my name that they asked was my race or ethnicity. And I told them what I tell everyone, that my father was born in India, my mother was born in Mexico, and I was born here. And they said, okay, I'll write you down as Mexican then. And I was like, no. The thing is like, my dad is still alive. He's a very big part of my life. I am Indian as much as I am Mexican. And of course, this is a conversation I have all over the time I'm 37. This is a conversation I've had thousands of times, but in a jail context, this woman's like behind plexiglass. She doesn't know what I'm in for. She immediately takes this as like an extreme aggression. And we finally, thanks to an officer, a mixed officer who was actually kind enough to step in and say, how about you just write her down as other? And I didn't really think much about any of that, except for how that was maybe the first time in my life I was speaking to someone who considered me a threat. The woman behind the plexiglass was genuinely afraid of me for the first time ever. Most people, between the voice and the giant fruit all over my clothes and things. I tend to be not that threatening as a human being. So I was, I focused on that until I got to prison, where we are not racially segregated like men's prisons, but politically segregated. To serve on the Women's Action Committee, I served under the other platform, and socially segregated. There are activities and things. It plays differently. You know, I was the only South Asian I saw in my time there, and it's, I don't really know how to describe it except it being like a lonely experience, being more othered, I think, than even out here where it's common to be in spaces where South Asian culture isn't really known. This is kind of, it's less about acknowledgement of it and more about the way prison sets up structures where there are only these pods and nothing else really has room to grow. And yeah, so I hope that answered your question, Savannah. I kind of went in circles, but yes, that's how classification worked for me inside.
Thank you so much, Ra. I'd like to pass it to Charles to share a little bit more again about yourself beyond the short bio I shared, and also how classification played out for you with your identity.
Blessing and abundance to all. Bula Vinaka. Bula Vinaka is good life greetings in Fijian. I was born and raised in Fiji. I'm half Indian and half Polynesian. My dad is a mixture of Madrasi and Punjabi, and my mom is a native of the island of Fiji. Growing up, you know, I was different, you know, at home watching Mithun, you know, all of the movies, and it was not too many kids like me, you feel me, that were mixed, that had that mix, that island mix and Indian mix. And so it was difficult when I came to America. A little more about me. I work as a spiritual activist, and classification. Let me focus a little bit. Get a little lost. So classification. Yeah, like Ross stated, you know, California especially is the men's prison is very racially segregated. So as soon as I get to the official who's doing this categorizing and putting everybody into their little boxes, he just looks at me and he's like, black. You feel me? That's all he just looked at me and he said, black. And I said, what? He said, I was like, no. He's like, what are you? I'm like, I'm from Fiji. He's like, okay, black. I'm like, he doesn't even know where Fiji is. He thinks I'm like in the Caribbean or something, right? So he just says black. I'm like, no, hold up. I'm half Indian, I'm half Fijian. I'm a native of Fiji Islands in the South Pacific. He's like, okay. You know, just like Ra, he just goes, other. He's like, you sure you want to go there? Because, you know, it's like they have to accept you. You have to really be an other to be put in there. And so I had to go through that, even in prison when they did that to me. And then when I got into the community there, they're like, they look at me and they were like, black, what are you doing here, bro? Like, you go over there, you know, just off of my appearance. And like Ra also, I was on a level 4 as a high max security in prison. And I was the only person that was there cooking curry, you know, like I couldn't speak. I couldn't talk to, you know, someone and share this. Like, I was alone. It was lonely. And I spent 12 years in prison, you know, sadly. And it was lonely. It was really lonely. All other like Indians that were in the system were at lower levels. And I was I was a higher level. I got into a lot of trouble when I first got in. And yeah, it was messed up experience, man. I kind of went all over the place, Savannah, my bad.
No, so perfect. Thanks for sharing that. And I want to mention to everyone who's here, feel free to put your reflections, any thoughts that you have in the chat. We're also going to be trying to share what's in the chat with members of our community who are currently incarcerated. So if you have any words of support for our speakers, but also for people who are currently behind bars, feel free to put that in there. And I also want to say, many of our panelists today have mentioned being classified as other or in ways that don't match their identity. And part of what makes this project so important to me is that our stories are kind of all we have, and being able to say, like, we were here and our community members are being affected by mass incarceration. So thank you to you all for sharing about that. And another theme that came up in the interviews involved the challenges of staying connected with family and culture behind bars, especially because of the rigidity of prison type systems. And Roa, in your oral history interview, you discussed about your efforts to celebrate Diwali behind bars. And I was wondering if you could share with everyone a little bit about that and just the struggles too of living in such a tightly regulated space.
Yeah, celebration isn't something that's like inherently contraband in prison or jail, but pretty much any metric you would use to describe a celebration is. So there's this balance that has to be navigated. They would never put in a book like, we don't want you to celebrate life in any form, but essentially, you know, there's no shared foods, and decorations are contraband material. So for context, there's that. And the way contraband and prison in general works is there are rules, and then every single official or authorized person kind of has their own interpretation of the rules. So you can get approval for something and then somebody else says no, and so on and so forth. And my parents are very big on celebration of life. So I was raised that way as a framework, and I tried to celebrate everything I could. And at least like with Christmas and things like that, there was a little bit of cultural overlay where when I took a lunchbox and fold it into what looks like a Christmas tree and start decorating it with like beads and pebbles I found outside, the officer, you know, looked at that, shakes his head, but he knows what a Christmas tree is, you know? So there's this cultural understanding of what I'm mimicking. And there's sort of a grace for it because of that shared unity. Because there were no South Asian officers anywhere I was. Actually, it was a Haitian officer was the only reason I was able to get somewhat. He was at least familiar with the holiday. So I started. There's this toothpaste that is. It was the best glue I've ever used in my life. So for context, I don't know if I would suggest it on your teeth, but I wish I had some for my craft projects out here. And it dries into like a bluish plaster. And so I started making designs. You know, it's what you do for Diwali. There's designs on the ground, and it's graced that way. So had a big design on my floor, and one of the officers, of course, had a problem with that. But the Haitian officer was like, no, I've seen this, though. This is a thing. She's not just losing it. This is a whole thing. So they allowed it a bit. You're allowed to at least leave your lights on where I was at that point in my journey because of, you know, fire camp. And for those who don't know, fire camp is like probably the most privileged group of incarcerated individuals on a state level system. Just because we have a gate key, we're allowed to leave to fight fires. So that idea of like a little bit more allowance. So I was allowed to leave the lights on, but not without a struggle and not without explaining it to people. And there's something, yeah, I guess it goes back to kind of a loneliness, but more than that, like it feels like you're losing something in real time. You know, like as a widow, I can say when someone passes away, it feels like it's like snatched from you that moment. But over time, it's the little things that start to feel like you just can't hold it, you know? Like a year after my husband passed and I realized I couldn't remember his shoe size, you know, and that's when it starts feeling like you're holding all of these things and they're maybe holding too tight, and maybe that's why they're slipping away. And that similar grief is what I can describe about trying to celebrate holidays like Diwali inside, because when you celebrate an emotional experience around people who have no unified thoughts or memories around it, and you're explaining it on this like scientific level of merit, particularly when India is so diverse. And part of the joy of these holidays is knowing that, like, my dad used to just be so, I don't know, we were raised with this idea that like all these people are celebrating Diwali, and get this, for different reasons, for different reasons all over India. And I love that. But explaining that to someone who doesn't know the context of our diversity is exhausting. And it really does feel like things slipping away, a sort of grief, and a grief you have to fight for to even have the right to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ra. Charles, I was wondering if you could share a bit too about how you were able to maintain your connection to your culture while you're behind bars, and what were the things that you missed?
I miss the food so much. That's a constant, good cooking, good. Oh my goodness, palau. I missed it so much. Food, just dal, like simple food, like I took for granted, I missed eating just like dal and rice, like, oh my goodness, or achar, or like simple stuff, that was a big thing that I missed. And one of the ways that I kept grounded was and kept connected was through songs. My dad was really big with singing Indian songs, and that's all he constantly sang, and so I would sing the songs I remember, as a kid, and just continue that. That was like the only way I could really speak and keep in touch with the language, even, is to just sing the song. And I was invited to the sweat lodge with the Native Americans, and they would allow me. They were like, hey, sing your song, man. And I would sing Indian songs. I would sing like Native Fijian songs, and but that's a big thing that kept me, connected to who I am. Both sides was songs, and art. There's one thing like the Mendi, like this will come to me, and I would do designs. Part of my art, like if I tattooed, or even like in prison, if I tattooed somebody, and the girl I'm tattooing on this dude, she will have like a piece of her that's like she'll have something that she'll be Indian, it's an Indian girl I'm tattooing. Different little ways, I find myself just trying to keep in contact with, connected, because it was so rare. There was an officer one time, he was there, and he would come by the door and speak to me, and he'd be tripping out. He'd be looking at me like, "You sure you're not black, dude? How do you speak Hindi?" Who taught you this? But yeah, it was songs. Through the songs was the biggest way for me to stay connected.
Thank you. I want to uplift. Shaheen posted a message in the chat saying Tariq is online. So if anyone does have any questions for him, feel free to ask. And Shaheen, I was wondering, I don't know if Tariq is still on right now, if he would want to answer this question too, of what are the things that he misses, and Tariq, what are the ways that you stay connected with your culture behind bars?
Tariq, you can go. I unmuted it.
Yeah, I think the only thing about keeping the culture is about my habit has always been reading. I try to stay with my language in that sense that I would get a lot of books from home. My family will get books from Pakistan. Just stay connected with Urdu and stay connected with the literature that I grew up on. Another thing about the culture is the fact that the family ties that I have been blessed with have kept me alive, in that sense that for every holiday that was important to us, family-wide, they would always include me in it. So I would call in at certain times, and the family would be gracious enough to take the call and be part of that. It's a struggle, like the brother was saying. It's about the food and everything else. But again, like hearing my two compatriots or two friends who have had the struggle of being incarcerated, the American jurisprudence system and incarceration system is very, very wide. So what's true for California is not true for Jersey. East Coast is different than West Coast, North and South. It's completely different countries. Over here, the struggles I have is mostly race-based in that sense that everything gears towards Islam and terrorism and all that stuff. Food and everything, again, is an issue, and we struggle to keep some semblance of, a part of our culture that's missing in here. But being a prisoner who's doing 150 years and locked up for 19 years, it's honestly it becomes very, very minuscule in the grand scheme of things. I recently wrote about a thing about identity in that sense that being a Pakistani, the idea of how we're classified, how we're treated, it changes by whatever is going on in the news. So culturally, yes, it's an issue, but I've been blessed with a gift of reading, and that's what has kept me in touch with my culture. About the classification, that's an ongoing saga.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next theme that has come up in the oral history interviews that we've been conducting is, what is our role in addressing mass incarceration as a South Asian American community? And we actually have Tariq's audio clip prepared on answering this question of what is the role of the South Asian American community in addressing mass incarceration. But since he's on the phone, Tariq, if you'd want to answer that now, you're welcome to.
You can play the recording and I can add in something later.
Perfect.
No one comes to the prisons. No one talks to the prisoners. No one is actually asking them how did you end up here, and what circumstances. No one actually. There's no oversight anyways, and there's no way of really scrutinizing what happened to a particular person being in prison. And by that I specifically mean is, like, you'll find, and I think I said this before in this interview, a lot of people come out of prison and you find them innocent of years after years. So you'll get your 15 minutes of fame, and as soon as the news cycle is gone, that is done. But that is so evil, because a person has spent 30, 40, 50 years in prison, and we give them less than 10 or 15 minutes in front of a camera and we forget about it. So it's something has to really change in the media, and I cannot stress that enough, because I think if that changes, everything will change. And more you show the underbelly of this evil system, that's when the public will understand. That will change the public's view, and that will eventually change the legislature, because they are basically representatives of the public. If you want others to do the thinking for you, then so be it, right? Knowledge comes, in my view, knowledge comes with scrutiny, and that cannot be done without proper oversight. So if you want to fix this issue, then get involved. Because at the end of the day, people talk about, societies were against fur, against culling of animals, the testing of animals. These are human beings you're talking about. And yes, a lot of them are condemned. We are condemned back here. But at the end of the day, it is still a human trade that is being done in your name. And I will end with this. I've been recently trying to, even with you, Shaheen, and some other friends, I've been trying to find studies for long-term incarceration. And the travesty of this particular search was this, that my hands are tied, I can't do searches, I don't have internet access, I can just ask and beg my friends to help me. I got a lot of studies about primates being kept in cages for a long period of time. You know what I didn't find? I didn't find one study ever that was done that had anything to do with the effects of long-term incarceration on human beings. That is an indictment. So if the public wants to do something, get involved. And I'll repeat what I said in the beginning. Know what's being done in your name. Because if you don't believe in anything else, I do believe that most of the people do believe in accountability, whether it's here or whether it's on the day when we meet the Lord. So accountability will be at hand. And I just request the same for us and the system that is, keeping us, under its knee.
Thank you, Tariq. If there's anything you'd like to add, you're welcome to.
Salvation community part. When I was first incarcerated, there was another prisoner, inmate in the county jail who came from Filipino community. And there was a sense of community within that diaspora. When those people got arrested, the entire community, entire church, entire neighborhood within the Jersey City, they came together. It became a particular thing for them to defend two people who they knew all their lives, right? And regardless of their crime, regardless of what the outcome of the trial and everything else, I'm just talking about the focus of the community. So if we're going to talk about the South Asian community, there is something that we need to talk about, which is there is an underlying tone within our society, whether if you're Indian or Pakistani or Bengali or Sri Lankan or Bhutani or wherever from South Asia you come from. Whenever the system or someone says from the authoritative position that this is what it is, our community tend to just capitulate, tend to just say, oh yeah, this is what happened. We forget our history, how our people were defined. Mira Nair said this thing, she's the Indian director of Savannah. She said people should tell their own story because if you don't, somebody else will. So that's a part of a community. It's a lesson in that statement. So for South Asians, we have to start questioning the system that we live under. Because somehow we forget, we just think this is the United States of America, this is a land of opportunity, and everything is, that's glitter is not gold, is the old adage. So as a community, I think we need to pay more attention. As a community, we need to stop ostracizing people who get entangled with the American jurisprudence system in a criminal manner, and start objectively looking at people rather than subjectively just, washing your hands off whoever of the community member or stuff who it doesn't. I know a lot of Indian friends who knew me and when I got arrested. And unfortunately, some of them said, well, this is what the Pakistanis do, right? They're Pakistanis who I knew all my life. And they said, well, he used to live like this particular life. He used to drink, he used to do whatever, he used to go out with girls. So on a moralistic sense, now this is something they can hang their hat on. There were other friends who I used to meet in the masjid and stuff, and they're like, well, if you came to the masjid enough. So everyone has their particular way of just trying to just, get you out of their life. So as a community for South Asians, and I'm very proud, a lot of people are going a lot of places, I see the community actually being part of the larger American community. So with that being said, I will nip in the bud and say this much, that we need to get involved when one of ours get in trouble, to be there and to represent them so they feel like they're part of the community and they're not left out to the wolves. That's all.
Thank you, Tariq. I want to turn to Charles. You were in immigration detention during the COVID pandemic and engaged in some really meaningful and important advocacy and resistance work behind bars on behalf of those who are detained with you. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how you think we can all join in this advocacy?
Definitely, Savannah. Yeah, so, me being in an immigration detention, that itself was just messed up, after I got done doing my time and I was found parolable. They granted California prison system granted me parole. They deemed me releasable and granted me parole. And here comes another agency before I walk out the gate, snatch me up and throw me in another cage. That was messed up. That really messed me up. My family was outside waiting for me at the gate and I never got to see them. So while I was in there, I just, it made no sense to me for me to be there and everybody else that was there. And then COVID hit. Once COVID hit, just how inhumanely they treat us, It's 100 guys in one room, no space. It's all double bunks stacked. It was worse than prison. Prison was bad. Prison was bad, but immigration detention was so much more worse, so much more worse, and so much more inhumane. And when I seen the opportunity, I brought up my points. We made a video that was put on YouTube. Was recorded by Interfaith Movement. And we just started writing letters, stepping up, got the whole dorm involved, everybody, people from all over the world, different countries, people that were there for years, just fighting to get back to their families. And we all stepped up, we all stood together and spoke out. And I'm fortunate with community support and a group of amazing attorneys, I was released. We did an action, we did hunger strikes. I actually was released after 4 days of hunger strike, and then I was released. Ways people can get involved, like Tariq is saying, like get in the mix, like action. This is the only way. There's a lot of shame too in the community that, or was also spoken of. And we live with shame. I live with shame, even coming back out, making it finally out here. And I still live with that shame. Like I shamed, my uncles, they don't really talk to me that much because they kind of chalk me out, like, oh, he's a bad guy. He went to prison, like keep the cousins away from him. He's gonna be a bad influence or stuff like that. So I did lose a lot of friends and family going to prison. But as a community, action, there are so many ways to be involved. I'm in so many different circles that we're engaging communities, vote. If you have the ability to vote, vote. If you have the ability to see someone going wrong, even before he go to prison, build community, build oneness. Because if we all belong to this one, if we all feel like we are part of something, then we're not gonna hurt it because we're part of it, If you see someone feeling left out, if you see this, do something about it. Especially for the youth, it's really difficult to correct a dysfunctional adult. It's so much simpler if we can speak to the youth and guide them, And that's most of my work right now. I'm trying to target my experience and going through my journey to figure out how I can assist the youth to make better decisions, to not go through the path that I went through, and involve community, this community building, this oneness for all of us to come together, the Indian community, everybody though, because we're all, at the end of the day, we're all interconnected, and we need to help each other. I hope I answered that, Savannah.
Absolutely. And I'll turn to you, Rod, to share about what you think the role of South Asian Americans is in addressing mass incarceration, and what are the skills and strengths that our community has that we might be able to use in addressing mass incarceration and building that kind of community support too, specifically that Charles was just talking about.
Yeah, thank you. I think as a mixed kid, you kind of get this ability to see some of the really beautiful things within the cultures that make you who you are. You see them sometimes from an outside view, and it kind of gives you this like larger sense and scale of what something is, kind of like looking at the ocean versus being in it. And one of the things that I really love about the South Asian community that is so unique to us, no matter where we've been taken on this journey, no matter where in the diaspora we are, is we have this incredible ability to hold people, to build community, to hold that community. And there was this psychological study called Dunbar's Law that says that one person can only manage 150 relationships in their life in any even slightly meaningful way. And after that number, there's no more room for people. And I remember telling my dad that when I learned it. My father was a mathematician. I was studying psychology. So, a little tension there on these theories. But his immediate response was just like, So it's a white psychologist, because Indian people, like, I've been at weddings with 150 people my whole life. Like, I know every single one of them, where they went to school. Like, this is not a problem. Our brains have been built for this, have been built for the wideness and bigness of the world. And we have so much influence within that sphere. And so much of the heart of what makes India and its entire diaspora so connected, the reason we feel connected to people who grew up on an island or a place in South Texas, you know, is the reason we look at each other and we're like, yeah, okay, we're figuring this out. We speak a similar language, and the reason is there are core beliefs of our culture, even if we don't sit down and talk about them in that really straightforward way. And one of those is that we heal for us. You know, we are trying to build what we can and do whatever we need to rally up this world to a place where our kids can really thrive. And our people have done that in incredible ways. You know, we have survived incredible things, and we've done all that survival for the next generation. And when I say that the incarceration problem in the United States is a crisis, I really mean that. I mean, it's an immediate crisis that you can have so much effect on with your voices and your participation. I mean, I now work for an organization called Initiate Justice that tries to pass laws in California that will eventually get rid of prisons. And this year we try to pass a law that says you can't be racist in the courtroom. And if someone was racist in the past court case, then that person has a right to have a new trial. And the legislators made it into a 2-year bill. Now that seems like something that should be pretty straightforward. We have Indian people in jail who in their court cases, they show you at Temple. My DA, that's what they showed me in. Rather than my mugshot, they were like, hey, here's a picture of this woman fully garbed at Temple with marigolds in her hand. And they thought, this is the picture. This is the one that she will be the biggest threat to a jury or an audience. And just hold that for a second. You know, we may not be the most targeted group, but we are a targeted group. And I feel like it is super important that we remember that. And even if we weren't in the mix, this is our culture. We build better places, we build better spaces, we fight for what's right. And we can do that on a scale that other people go to schools and schools and schools to learn. And we just love each other past this. And I think that's our gift. And we really need to use it. We need to use this because we are in a crisis that affects our people, that affects the people around us, and affects the world our kids are growing up in. And we've seen how small harm, how interference from state, how bad racist policies can really tear apart people more than anyone. We've seen that. We've lived it. Looking at the faces and some of the names and ages that came through and stuff, it's like some of you have lived it personally, one-on-one, in different countries, different places, you know. And I try not to be fatalistic, but this is the beginning of it, and this is the place where we can make the most change. So we need all of us to do that South Asian thing, you know. Call the 6,000 people in your phone book and make sure they gear up, because other people, other sides are doing that. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. We just have, I can't believe it, only about 5 minutes left of this conversation. And I do think that there have been these conversations happening before this conversation, and it'll continue after this as well. But I wanted to return to this activity that we started at the beginning of this session. I know many people have joined later on as well. So I'll just briefly describe the activity again, or actually, Sameep, would you be able to maybe put that slide up again? So this is a community art activity that we're participating in along with our community members who are behind bars right now, of thinking about the last time that we saw or experienced the moon or the sky, drawing that, and then writing how many days it's been or how long it's been since we've seen it. And so I'm going to ask in just about a minute for us to hold up that drawing if y'all participated in it. So that we can see everyone's, but I know many people just joined, so I want to give everyone maybe one more minute to put something together if you'd like to. And so it'll just be that drawing and the number of days or how long it's been since you have seen or experienced the moon or the sky. I'll share while y'all are all maybe working on that one of the themes that came up in almost every single interview is how people who are incarcerated must go weeks or months at times at different points in their incarceration without being able to experience some of the most basic things, like being able to clearly see the moon or to feel the sun's warmth, or as Ra had mentioned, being able to be around children. And so these very, very basic things are some of what our community members currently are not able to access. And part of the invitation too is to send this drawing, a picture of this drawing into us. I'll put the information in the chat again so that we can include it in this archive in an envelope that we'll send to our community members that are currently behind bars. And Samip, if you want to take that image off, I'll invite all of us to hold up whatever we have. It might not be done if you chose to draw an image. I'll hold mine up. So I invite everyone to look around. Feel free to turn your video on if you'd like to. And if you haven't gotten a chance yet, not too late at all, you can do so after this event. If there are children in your life, they might be interested in participating in this as well. I just want to invite all of us to remember and think of our community members that are behind bars, even in the simplest moments of our lives. And so much of the power of beginning to free ourselves from these systems is in the power of remembering and not letting our community members that are currently incarcerated be forgotten. And so I really invite you all, whenever you do see the moon or whatever you want to pick for yourself, for all of us to be really intentional. To remember that there are people who aren't free and able to join with us today, and to try to remember that. And then also in closing, if there are any notes or any words that you'd like to share, again, with any of our speakers today, but also to those of our members of our community who are currently behind bars, I'm going to be trying to include all that I can into this archive in an envelope to share with them, both from the oral history interviews that we've already conducted, but any words that you'd like to share now too. So any reflections, any thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat. And I just want to really, again, thank you so much to our speakers today. Thank you, Ra. Thank you, Charles. And I'm so glad that Tariq was able to be with us here as well in so many different ways. Thank you, Shaheen, for making that possible. Thank you, SAADA, and thank you to this community. There's so much left to be built, and I'm so excited to build it together with all of you. Sorry, there's always more to share. One other thing that I'll mention too is that we have a forum up. So if any of you have been affected by incarceration yourselves, or if you have community members or people in your life that have been affected by incarceration, we have a form up that you can fill out. I'm gonna put it in the chat. And so you can still submit your stories here, and we've gotten some really wonderful responses already. So feel free to share and contribute in that way, and of course to reach out if you have any other reflections. I see messages coming into the chat. Thank you all so much. And one other organization I'll put in here is the Asian American Support Committee that has been doing really incredible work for a long time in this space, if you'd like to check them out. And we're right at time, so thank you all so much again. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you again to our speakers.